The federal government of Nigeria has announced plans for Eurobond issuance in the international capital market. Last time Nigeria accessed the ICM was November 2018. Though through the Eurobond issuance, Nigeria is expected to raise no more than $6.2 billion. The Debt Management Office says the money raised will be used to finance various projects in the 2021 appropriation. But what worries some economists and other stakeholders is how these monies will be paid. Tonight, to assess the debt burden of the federal government is Babajide Ugusowu, our data and information consultant. Nice to have you here.
Good evening, Amarachi.
Yes, and so what have previously borrowed monies been used for? What facts do you have?
Lots of facts, but I'd like you to listen to this carefully, and that's because, like you had asked, whenever revenue keeps falling and expenditure keeps rising, then the deficit keeps growing. And when the deficit keeps growing, then the government will have to borrow more money. And when the government borrows more money, it will have to borrow even more money to repay the money it has borrowed. And so, that's what happens.
The domino effect.
Let me make myself clear. Since 2015 to 2020, in that 6-year period, the federal government of Nigeria has earned 23 trillion naira. You heard me right, 23 trillion naira. Well, more than half of that amount has been used to pay interest on debt. There are 3 reasons why this is important. The first reason is education, health, and agricultural sector within the last 6 years, 2015 to 2020. The money spent on these 3 sectors, based on the evidence of the Central Bank of Nigeria, 9 trillion naira. However, money spent, interest on debt service payments, 12 trillion naira. In other words, our obligation to debt is now higher than our obligation to education, health, and the agricultural sector. Fact 1. The second fact is, in the next 100 hours, Amarachi, Nigeria will be celebrating the 61st independence. And based on our debt burden, one of the things that will be on the lips of observers is that, is it an administrative independence that we're celebrating or a financial independence? Because even the fact shows that between 2015 and 2020, that 6-year period, capital imported into the country, $77 billion. But 60% of this amount has come from 2 countries, the United States and the United Kingdom. And third and final, why are people shouting about Nigeria's debt burden? It's because the country as a whole owes 33 trillion naira. And that 33 trillion naira is being owed by not just the federal government, states, and the Federal Capital Territory, but the challenge of the federal government is, out of this 33 trillion naira, 27 trillion naira is being owed by the federal government.
So what does the borrowing trend then look like, especially debt servicing?
It depends. Let's take a look at what comes up in front of us, because then it allows us to clearly understand what is going on when it comes to debt servicing and debt trends. And if we take a look at the facts, here's what you notice. There's some good news and there's some bad news. Let's start with the bad news. Here is our domestic debt trends. In 2010, it was 4.5 trillion naira. By December 2015, 8.8 trillion naira. By December 2020, it had almost doubled to 16 trillion naira. What is in front of you is the debt, the domestic debt of the federal government. There's also the external debt portion. And if you take a look at the external debt, we also see those fast rising curve. External debt shows in December 2010, external debt was approximately 689 billion. It moved to 1.4 trillion naira 5 years after, and 5 years after, it has moved from 1.4 trillion naira to 11 trillion naira. The summation is, as at December 2020 last year, domestic debt 16 trillion naira, external debt 11 trillion naira, and that is the challenge. We've seen a sharp rise in domestic debt and in external debt. The good news is there are still some countries, many countries, that are still willing to give Nigeria a loan. Some other day we'll talk about the reason why these countries are still willing, despite our debt burden, to give us money. But that is good news. The good news is we still have the capacity to collect based on what other countries are offering us. The bad news is that our debt burden has significantly shot up within the last 5 years.
So very quickly, does the borrowing then outweigh the cost?
The question is, who is measuring and who is really counting? And what we've seen is we don't have that confidence that those in government are really studying these trends and looking at the cost. Let's take a look at what is in front of us, looking at revenue and how much is being spent on servicing debt. We're not even talking about the principal repayment, just interest repayment. And what you'll see is that at 2015, debt service over revenue was 31%. In simple terms, the government earned 3.4 trillion naira in 2015 and spent just a little over 1 trillion naira servicing debt. Let's fast forward to last year. The government earned 3.9 trillion naira and spent 3.2 trillion naira, 82% paying interest, just servicing debt, interest payment on monies we've borrowed. And the trends for this year seem to even be worse than 82%, which means that we are soon going to be, if the trends continue, all the money the government is earning will be used to pay debts. And in the final analysis, let's remember the words of Benjamin Franklin. He who goes a borrowing goes...
I'm sorry. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
The pleasure is all mine.
I look forward to that conversation on why countries are still lending.
Sometime soon we'll do that.
Of course. Thanks again.